Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Kiorkof, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my must-own running backs going into the 2020 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about 6 different running backs who I cannot get enough of going into the 2020 fantasy football season. These different prospects not only have high upside, but have a safe floor going into the 2020 season, even with guys like Jonathan Taylor, despite being a rookie, despite not knowing whether or not he's going to have the starting job, whether it's by week 2 or week 12. I still think that he's got incredible value in his respective backfield. But besides Jonathan Taylor, we're going to be talking about CARSON, James Conner, James White, Antonio Gibson, and Zach Moss. We'll cover out those 6 running backs because I know I posted a must-own running backs a little bit earlier last week. And you guys were a little upset because there was only 2 players. I'm bringing a little bit more players this time. Try to go through them pretty quickly, give you guys my thought process on why I'm trying to target these players in my upcoming drafts. For those of you who are drafting this weekend, good luck. It's going to be fun. And then on Monday, we will start with running back starter sit rankings. So until then, enjoy. All right, before we begin, I wanted to go ahead and thank you guys for the incredible support you guys have been sending in my direction. We just recently surpassed 16,000 subscribers. I mean, you guys have been absolutely insane. You guys have been smashing the like button. For those of you who are new to the channel, you guys have hit the subscribe button. You've joined the community. We will be creating fantasy football content here for the entirety of the 2020 season. Starting this upcoming Monday, we're going to be doing the running back video, and then we'll have wide receiver rankings, quarterback rankings, tight end rankings, hidden gems where I pull out the fantasy gauntlet and, disperse a little bit of information here and there. We'll do Sunday morning live streams. Again, subscribe to the channel. Try to get us to that 17,000 goal. Thank you very much, guys. All right, let's go ahead and let's talk about Jonathan Taylor going into this upcoming season. I could talk about these players forever, but there's 6 players. I want to go through them quickly. You guys don't have a lot of time, and I know you guys are drafting this weekend, so let's go this as quickly as possible. Jonathan Taylor joining the Indianapolis Colts is a match made in heaven, in my opinion. Behind this monster offensive line, who in my opinion is the best run blocking offensive line in the National Football League, and they're probably graded as such according to PFF, Jonathan Taylor is pretty much going from Nebraska, which is a team all about bruising and just having their offensive linemen impose their will, to the Indianapolis Colts, which is pretty much the exact same kind of scheme. I mean, looking at the success that Jonathan Taylor had at Nebraska in the last 3 seasons. In the last 3 seasons at Nebraska, he had I think it was 12 games of over 200 rushing yards. That's insane. In the 3 seasons he was there as a starting running back, he surpassed over 6,000 rushing yards. In the past 2 seasons, 2,000 a pop. He had 26 touchdowns his last year, 16 touchdowns his junior year. In this past season, he went ahead and made his game overall better by getting himself more involved in the passing game. With the ability to catch the ball out of the backfield in a Phillip Rivers-led offense, that is something that honestly could end up making the difference this upcoming season. When we think about another Nebraska running back by the name of Melvin Gordon used to play with Phillip Rivers, and the amount of targets and ability that he was getting in the passing game and the opportunity he was getting there, even though Austin Eckler was far and away the best receiving back on that team, it didn't matter, because if in fact Jonathan Taylor, who has proven that he is a capable enough receiving back, can stay on the field on 3rd downs, it's going to lead to him supplanting Marlon Mack for the starting position even sooner. Now, Marlon Mack is a ticking time bomb. What I mean by that is this is his 4th year in the season. It's his final year of his rookie contract. Next season, he's an unrestricted free agent. They don't have to bring him back. And I think it's a passing of the torch situation. They go ahead and they bring in Jonathan Taylor by drafting him in this early 2nd round because they know we need a backup or we need the future. They found the future in Jonathan Taylor, and he's going to lead to their ultimate success. And even if Marlon Mack begins as the starting running back this team, it's only a matter of time until Jonathan Taylor makes those runs and bursts out and wins the job and shows to everyone why he's the most talented back on this team. On top of it, Marlon Mack has always gotten injured. In his 3-year career, he's never played a 16-game season. So that in itself could definitely hurt him if, in fact, he gets injured and, Jonathan Taylor can just run away with the opportunity. On top of it, last season, the Colts in 2019 had the 5th most rushing attempts amongst all NFL teams. On top of that, they had 400-plus rushing attempts at the running back position, had 1,800 rushing yards plus at the running back position, and 13 total touchdowns from the guys who contributed in that backfield. I think that kind of opportunity, that kind of productivity behind this offensive line with this kind of a running back, this next tier of running back, a 4.3940. That's what he ran. He is an absolute monster. He was amongst the top of the NCAA running backs. He had 1,257 yards after contact last year, 87 forced missed tackles. This is a different kind of running back, and I'm glad that he found himself on the Colts because he's soon going to be finding himself on my fantasy football team this year. Moving on. Chris Carson. Now, I know I've talked about Chris Carson a lot this offseason. I did a player profile video because, again, Chris Carson, though he's been an incredible running back, was a top 12 running back last season, despite missing the last 2 games of the season. I mean, that Cardinals game after he got his hip injury, he pretty much didn't play 75% of the game. And then you go ahead and you miss week 17. So he played barely. Okay, I would say he played 14 games. Honestly, if you're going to ask me what it qualifies as, I don't even count that week 16 game against the Cardinals. Doesn't count. He got injured. So all in all, he's been ultra productive ever since week 3 of the 2018 season. Since week 3 of the 2018 season against the Dallas Cowboys, where he won the job finally, he's been averaging 14.97 fantasy points per game in a half PPR scoring format. That in itself, an incredible statistic. But on top of it, just looking at his stats from the last couple of years. In 2018, he had 247 total rushing attempts. 2019 had 278 total rushing attempts. Obviously, his rushing yards went up. His rushing touchdowns, though they were not, reciprocated in terms of the number continuing to increase, he still had 9 touchdowns each of the last 2 years, which is beautiful. But the thing on top of it that I love the most about Chris Carson's productivity in 2019, his usage in the passing game. 47 targets, 37 receptions for 266 receiving yards and 2 receiving touchdowns. That in itself is getting him into this this RB1 conversation because, again, the Seattle Seahawks are a run-first team. And Chris Carson is their lead back. Despite his injury, Rashad Penny's still dealing with the ACL, trying to rehab and come back. A lot of people are talking about DJ Dallas, but DJ Dallas is not a better running back than Chris Carson. And though they bring in Carlos Hyde, who is, surpassed 1,000 rushing yards last year for the Houston Texans, Carlos Hyde is not that good of a running back. There's a reason why Carlos Hyde, in just the past 4 seasons, has gone from the 49ers to the Browns to the Jaguars to the Houston Texans, now to the Seattle Seahawks. He's a journeyman because he is an insurance policy, and that is the most that you're going to get out of him. He is a handcuff. And not even a handcuff with that much upside, because even if Chris Carson goes down, there's always a potential they go sign another running back. They bring in a Devontae Freeman or do something of that extent because they know maybe Carlos Hyde can't get the job done. Regardless, looking at other statistics that Chris Carson has kind of proven why he's such a monster over the last couple of years. Against the NFC West, against his own division, against the Cardinals, 49ers, and the Rams, last season was averaging 16.53 fantasy points per game in a half PPR scoring format. Last year, he had 4.4 yards per attempt on average, which is a great number. He had 32 rushes of 10-plus yards, 14 rushes of 15-plus yards. Those numbers, pretty crazy considering the 32 rushes of 10-plus yards was 5th in the league amongst all running backs. The 14 rushes of 15-plus yards was 4th amongst all running backs. The 74 missed tackles that he forced last season was 4th amongst all running backs last season. And his 3.63 yards per carry, yards after contact per carry last season, a little bit of a fumble there, was 2nd amongst all running backs that had at least the eligible amount of 100-plus rushing attempts last season. Chris Carson is an animal, and I honestly think that he's being extremely underrated this upcoming season, and he's a must-own in my eyes going into this season. Moving on. Talk about our next running back on hand, James White. Again, we talked about Nebraska running backs. James White used to be a Nebraska running back, and though he's not really used or kind of looks like one of those Nebraska running backs that's running behind a monster offensive line and just cleaning up yards, James White finds his value in half and full PPR formats. Like I mentioned a couple of days back when when I did my tips and tricks video, how to win your fantasy championship this upcoming season. James White in a full PPR was the number 18 overall back last season, number 22 overall back in a half PPR. This upcoming season, a couple things have happened in the last couple of days that have kind of, in my opinion, rose the value of James White. Damian Harris has been a little bit injured. He's gone down. And Lamar Miller has been cut. So where do we have on roster? We have Sony Michel, we have James White, we have Rex Burkhead, and then Damian Harris back on the injury kind of block. Looking at what James White produced last season in a full PPR, he only had 3 performances of less than 10 total fantasy points. That in itself is such a valuable asset to any fantasy team as your potential third RB, especially if you play in a full PPR. I mean, the last 2 seasons in terms of his productivity in the passing game have been great. I mean, the fact that he can go ahead and catch the ball 70 plus times, catch himself 5 plus touchdowns, regardless of anything, those stats are always going to lead to his ultimate success. But now that you bring in Cam Newton. A lot of people think, they don't have Brady. Brady loves to throw the ball to the, check down. Well, so does Cam Newton. I mean, we go back and we look at the 2018 Carolina Panthers. That offense was 100% committed to passing the ball out of the backfield to Christian McCaffrey and feeding him the rock. In fact, that season, Cam Newton almost jumped his passing completion percentage almost nearly 10%. His career average prior to 2018 was a 58.5%, and it jumped to 67.9 just that year as he targeted Christian McCaffrey 7.86 times per game in 2018 in a 14-game period. I mean, that in itself kind of helps me out. And I think about James White and I think, okay, last season he played the most snaps amongst all running backs for the New England Patriots. That's a great sign to see. He's going to be their third down back regardless, and in a PPR setting, going to find that available opportunity. Cam Newton likes to check the ball down because, again, if in fact something breaks down the offensive line pressure, sure, he can extend the play. But once you extend the play with your legs, Cam Newton, you can find James White open almost all the time. Last season, James White ran 337 routes. On those routes, he was targeted 95 total times. That makes it a 28.19% target rate with a 1.91 yards per route run. I mean, these statistics that I'm reading, like even when I'm reading them, I'm almost like what is happening? That number right there, 1.91 yards per route run last season, was fourth amongst all running backs with at least 100 routes ran. So, to be honest, looking pretty good to be, in my opinion. So, as of this moment in time, when I think about the New England Patriots, what they're capable of doing, the statistics that he's done in the passing game, he's always going to get 200 and something rushing yards. He's going to get himself a handful of touches. And if Sony Michel goes down, we've seen him even in 2018 be a top 12 running back because he can get the ball out of the backfield and just dominate as the RB1 of this team. He's done it before. If in fact the New England Patriots struggle this upcoming season because of Cam Newton, it still doesn't hurt James White, because if there's a negative game script, that just leads to him being on the field more often. And if that's the case, I'm perfectly fine with that. And that's why I like James White so much this season. Moving on, James Conner. Okay, James Conner, I'm ready to plant the flag. James Conner is a little bit of a sketchy running back because of his injuries, but I think everything that he's done prior to his injuries, and I think this upcoming season is the culmination of all of his efforts and what is going to potentially pay off. I think we have the potential of seeing James Conner really have a breakout season here. In 2018, prior to his injury, he pretty much was on that pace. 973 rushing yards, 12 rushing touchdowns, 71 targets, 55 receptions, 497 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown, was pretty much producing the Le'Veon Bell-esque numbers. And then though, Big Ben Roethlisberger got injured in week 2 of last season's, start, James Conner was still a relevant running back for the first 8 weeks of the season prior to getting injured. I mean, in the first 7 games of the season last year, he was averaging 15.73 fantasy points per game in a half PPR setting while catching 29 of his 31 total targets. And he was the number 9 running back in weeks 1 through 8. James Conner is kind of often overlooked because they think, okay, the end of season stats looks like he finishes the number 33 running back, but he also didn't play a lot of games. He missed a significant amount of time. And prior to his injury, the dude's playing 75% of the offensive snap count. After the injury, he's a shell of himself. I get it. But if in fact you can get a full healthy season out of James Conner and you can draft him later in your draft, the opportunity's gonna be there. I mean, in his career, when James Conner has been given the opportunity in the backfield, when I'm talking about 18 plus touches, he's produced 10 games of 18 plus touches in the last 2 seasons. In those games, I mean, it's actually been insane. He's averaged 25.8 fantasy points per game, the 10 games that he's done that in the last 2 seasons. Incredible statistics. Even last season, despite having the quarterback position just completely a mess. I mean, Duck Hodges and Mason Rudolph, they couldn't even help themselves, secure a starting job there and maybe have a decent year. And to be honest, they just kept going back and forth and giving each other opportunities until one of them finally, just didn't throw too many interceptions, and then they were given the starting job. But regardless, even with a terrible quarterback and defenses stacking the box against James Conner, he still managed to average 4 yards per carry last season, prior to everything going down. 16 rushes of over 10 plus yards, 6 rushes of 15 plus yards. He has the burst. He has the ability. He's easily a 3-down back. He's just got to stay healthy. And I think if this season I can get him at a far cheaper price than I typically would. If he goes ahead and falls to me in my respective draft, I think I'm willing to go after James Conner this upcoming season because I know what his potential is. I know what this offense is capable of. And I think with the offensive line improvements that they've made, James Conner can truly, in his 4th year, the final year of his contract, when everyone thought he would potentially hold out because of his, health concerns of the past, James Conner's coming out ready to ball, so I'm trusting in him. All right, moving on. Our last running backs on hand. We're going to go ahead and clump Antonio Gibson and Zach Moss together because these are 2 rookie running backs that I've mentioned in the past. Let's start with Antonio Gibson. Antonio Gibson's coming out of Kentucky. A running back that's really a Swiss Army knife because he's a wide receiver / running back. In fact, he touched the ball in the passing game more often in college his last year than he did on the ground. He had 38 receptions for 735 receiving yards. That's a 19.3 yard per reception average, while he had 33 attempts on the ground for 369 receiving or rushing yards. That's an 11.2 yard per carry attempt. And he had 12 total touchdowns in his last year. Now, here's the thing about Antonio Gibson. He does not have miles on him at all. He hasn't touched the ball more than maybe 80 times in his entire NCAA career. He really is a specific player. A lot of special team return game, a lot of work in the passing game. You can run him on a jet sweep. You can hand him the ball off out of the backfield on a zone scheme, on a counter scheme. It doesn't really matter because Antonio Gibson can pretty much do it all. But the other day, Adrian Peterson was cut. So we look at the roster and we see Peyton Barber, J.D. McKissick, Antonio Gibson, and we have ourselves Bryce Love. The Washington football team, as of this coming season, will have Ron Rivera as their head coach. Bringing over also Scott Turner, the offensive coordinator formerly of the Carolina Panthers. So they bring over their Carolina Panthers, group of coaches. They bring it into the Washington football team organization. And you go ahead and you have yourself an offense that, like last season, probably wants to target the running back position because they targeted Christian McCaffrey, 100 plus times there? I mean, that in itself kind of gives me a little bit of confidence thinking, okay, if this offense wants to target the running back so often, and they literally have a wide receiver that plays running back by the name of Antonio Gibson on roster, and he's getting a lot of hype during camp. With Adrian Peterson gone, sure, Peyton Barber will probably be the guy that takes the early down work, but the Washington football team is going to be on a negative game script almost the entire season, and that in itself is going to put Antonio Gibson on the field for majority of the second half on 3rd down, and he's going to get himself involved in the passing game. Even Chris Thompson last year for that team was getting work, and now that this guy's here, I think he has a very good potential of being a little bit of a sleeper back that later in your draft you could pick up and over time can be a pretty good PPR contributor. Moving on, Zach Moss. Now, Zach Moss is going to fill into Frank Gore's shoes. Now, Frank Gore had over 160 total rushing attempts, had more rushing attempts than Devin Singletary did last year. But Zach Moss is a little different because Zach Moss, in terms of his college productivity, far better. I mean, he's proven that he's one of the better running backs coming out of this draft class. 1,400 rushing yards, 15 rushing touchdowns, 28 receptions for 388 receiving yards and 2 receiving touchdowns. That in itself, a pretty ridiculous number. On top of that, 4.45 yards per carry after contact. Woo! Goodness, is that a ridiculous stat. On top of that, 89 forced missed tackles, second amongst all running backs in the NCAA last year. Again, Jonathan Taylor was up there. He had 87. So, Zach Moss, even greater number. 21 carries of 15 plus yards. Again, when we talk about what Frank Gore and Devin Singletary did last year as a duo, Frank Gore pretty much had the early, season work until, in fact, Devin Singletary broke out. All of this offseason has been, where is Zach Moss going to take over the job? Because if and when, Singletary messes up, fumbles like he's been doing at practice, there's been a lot of coaches and a lot of, media outlets that have said Singletary is on a pretty short leash. If he goes ahead and messes something up here, they're going to give Zach Moss majority of the RB1 work there. And because he's capable of being a 3-down back, proving that he is a capable receiving back for that Buffalo Bills team, I expect, there's a slight potential that Zach Moss could be a major pickup and a major draft pick, that even though you can get him in the 6th, 7th, 8th round, depending on your league format, again, 2 QBs, 1 QB, doesn't matter. I'm just throwing it out there. I think Zach Moss is one of these running backs that can go ahead come into this organization, pick up work early, be a goal line back, and punch the ball in, and maybe take a couple touchdowns away from Josh Allen, though he's been stealing everybody's touchdowns over the last couple of years. I think Zach Moss is a great overall running back and a nice guy that I'd like to potentially target this upcoming season, and I want on my roster and I want to own. Anyway, these are the running backs. We covered Jonathan Taylor, Chris Carson, James White, James Conner, Antonio Gibson, and Zach Moss. I really do think these are must-own running backs. I think a lot of these guys you can get for cheaper value than they would typically go for, or where they're going to potentially produce this upcoming season. And I honestly think that going into this upcoming season, like usual, the running back position is going to be the biggest difference maker. Can you find that running back that has the breakout season that a lot of people ignored and ends up becoming a guy that could sit as your flex running back, but on a weekly basis produce like a pick that you probably should have had within the first 5 rounds rather than in the back 8. But regardless, thank you everybody for watching. I really do appreciate you guys' continued support. If you like today's video, smash the like button. And until next time, which will be tomorrow, we'll be doing bold predictions for the 2020 season. I'll see you guys. Peace.